you're live.
Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started with our school committee meeting from Wednesday, May 27th. Thank you for joining us tonight. At the beginning of the meeting tonight, we have our consent agenda, which includes the past record from school committee meetings on May 22nd, May 19th, May 14th, and the joint meeting with the Select Board and Planning Board from May 12th. Can I have a motion to approve those consent agenda? Thank you, Barbara. And a second?
Second.
Second by David. Thank you. All right. Does anyone have any comment on the consent agenda? All right. Seeing none, because we're remote, we have to do all of our votes by roll call. Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
Ms. Fetterspiel?
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly?
Yes.
Ms. Scotto?
Yes.
Dr. Abramowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Wolfenkoff?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Ben, if you and Ben and Dr. Gittens, we have an update on the summer and fall planning in response to COVID-19.
Yep, great. Thank you, Julie. So we're going to mix things up here a little bit. So the planning groups, as you know, are being led by Dr. Gittens, Ms. No Miller, and Dr. Warnham. We're going to start by having Ms. No Miller give us an update, and then Dr. Gittens will follow on, including an update of a recent meeting in the BEU about how they want to, we may work with them on the planning. So Casey?
Great, thanks, Ben. Am I able to share my screen?
Robin, can you make her the presenter?
I also sent the PowerPoint. Oh, Robin did make me a presenter, so I think I have that option now. Yep. Okay, just give me 1 second while I pull it up. Okay, great. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as folks know, the school committee knows that our direction, we had first started off planning in 3 different scenarios. We had split groups of principals, coordinators, special education directors, Mindy, Keith, nurses, and guidance counselors and psychologists into 3 large groups. And the direction that we were giving our groups was to begin planning for remote learning in some sense next school year. We would begin to gather information both from colleagues from different districts, but also from within the district with each other. We did want to take into consideration survey data from the recent survey out to families, and think about how we can have a more robust learning experience for staff and students. We started our first meeting on May 13th, and I think we reported this at the last school committee meeting. Those 3 approaches, or 3 teams, if you will, were if we were going to be fully remote, fully back into the buildings, and a hybrid of the 2. Within these 3 groups, so Khalees, Nicole, and I each led one of these approaches. Within these 3 approaches, we further broke up into subgroups, and you see them listed there. An update from the last time we spoke with the committee is it seemed to make more sense to combine all of the subgroups across all of the approaches, given the updates that we had been getting in guidelines from public health departments, the CDC, the governor. It made sense to combine the groups and to begin looking at what a remote/hybrid model would look like, knowing that the chances that we would be fully back into schools is really slim. And combining all the intellectual horsepowers within these subgroups made the most sense. Just gives you a little bit in terms of what the groups have been talking about within the academics group, considering different models. And there's a lot out there, and we can look to other countries for this. What are the pros and cons to the different models? And an example of a model would be, do we start off completely remote and bring, select populations back later on in the school year? Or do we flip that? And there are reasons that there are reasons that we can think of that each model would work better, and talking through those. And then if we do bring back students, what's that select population? Do we start with the youngest students? Do we start with our students in special education, those that are highest needs, or both? Or do we do a 1 week on, 1 week off, so we only have 50% of the population of students in the buildings? Within the health and safety group, we are thinking through what the physical and mental health needs are for both students and staff, planning through all the different scenarios in which staff and students move across the day, and what are those protocols. And this is where you'll see a lot of overlap with the operations group. So what's the equipment that we need once we know what those points are where we will have movement within the populations in the buildings. And then there's a lot of concern for when cold and flu season hits. What are the, how do we standardize the procedures should we have to close buildings again? I will pass it off to Nicole now to talk a little bit more about academics and what was talked about today and in her group previously.
You. So as we are thinking about what will happen with academics, we want to make sure that we start the year with clear expectations for content and skills at each grade level, much like what we put out once we were in remote learning. We want to start the year with that. What we are finding in some of the webinars that we've participated in is that we really need to pare down to think about what students missed the year before, and to think about what a core and necessary things for them to learn in order to build skill that's applicable in multiple areas. We also are thinking about the continuity between remote and hybrid, recognizing that if we are at some point in the year remote, and then at another point in the year hybrid, or starting to return to buildings, that we don't want to think. We want to be thinking about how we have continuity, so that we're not moving to completely different materials, completely different platforms of learning, but there is consistency, so that there's flexibility as we may have to make adjustments back and forth. Also looking at, what are the best and appropriate assessments for student learning to kind of help support teachers in addressing academic needs for students and their readiness to move forward in content areas. Of course, professional development for all educators is an important part of that, and we're actually kind of building some internal capacity, as well as seeking out professional development opportunities through different organizations that can happen in the summer and throughout the year. And then, really trying to glean what our best instructional practices by grade level, what are the experiences out there, what are the recommendations, what has worked well within the district, and what we can learn from some of our fellow districts. And one of the things that we've heard a lot of is that what we are doing is largely based on screen time, and we have to move beyond that. And so what materials do we want to make sure are in the hands of students at home, and how do we move beyond screen time so that students are not, that students actually have access to books and things that they really need to touch, feel, and that there's consistent access to materials for all students. Also, one of the things that we've also been thinking about is really getting into a design thinking process. And so how to go through that 5-step process where we're thinking about like, what are our goals? What do we want to see happen? Because as we're going through this undertaking, it's massive. It's, building a district in a remote environment. It's, how do we mitigate some of the challenges that we've seen already? How do we plan for those? How do we do better? And so we really want to make sure that we're tying our thinking back to a concrete, just a concrete foundation, and that we are being thoughtful, that there's something for us to go back to say, like, does this match what we are trying to accomplish? We recognize that this closure will have impact beyond next year. And so we need to be thinking about that and planning for that. And then I'll turn it back to Casey. Did you want to talk about the health and safety slide? You're on mute.
Oh, okay. Looks like Robin unmuted me. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So an update, because so the teams all meet at the same time on Wednesdays, and I wanted to share a quick update in terms of what this group, the health and safety group, talked about today. I have a couple of counselors and psychologists in this group, and they shared the importance of a universal screening. The Mass Association for School Psychologists and also the State Association for Mental Health Professionals are stressing the importance of a universal screening, not just for staff and for students. And so we have a smaller group of folks within the health and safety group researching what's out there. They already have a couple of suggestions because they've been obviously looking into this. And so really it's about identifying the tools and where we want to spend our human capital. Do we want to create our own screener, which we could certainly do and analyze, collect the data ourselves? Or do we want to invest in essentially a plug and play program that does it for you, analyzes it, identifies who your tier 1 students are, tier 2 and tier 3. So that's what that's one topic we're talking about. Another is protocols, which I talked a little bit about earlier in terms of the different movement that happens during the school day and where those protocols are necessary. I imagine at this point, once we can identify what those protocols are, we'll merge groups with the operations group to really talk through what that can look like. Hal Mason is on the operations group because, as you can all imagine, the high school is way more complex. Just given the how much movement happens during the school day, but that's an example of some of the protocols that we're thinking of. And then another important piece is how do we educate folks throughout the summer to prepare everyone for remote learning, and if we can bring back some populations, what does that look like? What do kids need to know? What do families need to know? Hopefully some of you have had a chance to see the wonderful video that the nurses created, an educational video around hand washing and the importance of wearing face masks. I will kick it off to Khalees for an update on operations.
Thanks. Thank you, Casey. Can you advance the slide? Thank you. And so operations, we met today as well. Today, part of the visioning that we've done, and I have to thank Nicole for structuring the frame of how we started our discussion, talking about common tech platforms by grade level. These are things that we think we definitely have to break down. Technical support for families, and not just making sure that everyone has a device, but does everyone have access to Wi-Fi? Should we invest in Kajits? Is that something that we'll have to do in our new normal? Essential materials for teachers, But then really looking at what's the best use of our staff and the best use of time for our staff. We and then supervision and evaluation and scheduling. And we started today by just trying to drill down on things that we have to have decisions on. How will we spent today thinking, how would we do lunch? How do you do lunch if we go back and we have to social distance? And so we spent a lot of time talking about, can we have lunch in the classroom? Do we know the square footage of our cafeterias? But then when we had a decision or a couple of options that could happen for lunch, if we have to social distance, then the plan goes out the window when you go to the high school. Because again, even if we brought half the staff back, or I'm sorry, half the students back, we're still talking about over 900 bodies in the building. And how do you social distance at lunch at that time? So we talked about, is there a half day kind of option that we're doing? And so right now we are still very much in the brainstorming phase and trying to decide. It's our struggle is, how do you operationalize a plan that hasn't been confirmed yet? There are so many what ifs. And so right now we're thinking through how to make it happen within a certain structure, assuming that it's going to be a hybrid, assuming that we'll have to social distance. Should we do a 10 to 4? Should it be 4 days on, 10 days off? Like, those are the conversations that we're thinking through. But every question, every plan we come up raises conversations about the union. Will the union support a plan? Can we ask teachers to do this new normal? Excuse me. And so we have to drill down. This slide shows what we're envisioning, but we have to drill down into arrival. And we're looking at, what does arrival look like? And how do we do that? And where do we space things? So it's a summary of where we are, not a lot of answers, but a lot of things have been considered.
I want to go back and just briefly talk about I had a meeting on Friday with Jess and a couple of folks from the executive board of BEU. It was a really productive conversation just around their thinking. So they are actually starting to work with bringing teachers together to organize along the same lines that we are talking about health and safety, really making sure that they are sticking closely to the guidelines that come from public health, thinking about, just had a moment. Thinking about workload, scheduling, and those items. And so what we imagine is that there would be some work, because Jess definitely has a way to reach a broader group of BEU members. We do have on each of our teams, we have a number of BEU members who are working with us and supporting the work. She is looking to reach out to a broader group of those people and then figure out how we can kind of have some liaison system by which members from each group kind of come together to have more, to fine tune some of the work and the discussion. We talked about, the need for an MOU. She recognizes that there will be a need for an updated MOU for next year and all of the things that need to be considered for that. And so we're actually hoping, she's going to reach out to me when she has more plans so that we can kind of move this forward, kind of in a joint labor management committee format. And so hopefully we can get some really good synergy around the work. The other thing that is really important for us to think about, and we had a call with the state today, just about thinking through what it means to come back. And we keep hearing half the students and half the students. And I think it's really much more nuanced than that, right? When you think about, and I just instantly thought about the stores and how they are saying so many people are allowed in per square foot. And I think that's probably the way we're going to have to think about things. We're going to have to really think about like how many kids can fit in each room. Rooms are all different sizes. Schools are all different sizes, different configurations. And so what might work at Pierce might not work at another school. When I think about Lincoln, Lincoln has a lot of smallish classrooms. And so we need to really think about that. We can't just say half of the students will come back and half of the students will be in school, but really like what's the nuance of like how do we figure out what the formula is that we need to consider when bringing students back. And so that makes things that much more complicated. And I think that, and I've got to give it to Dr. Warnham, the complexity of trying to figure out a world in which we bring students back and staff back to school when we really don't have any real clear decisions about what is going to happen and at what level will the decisions be made. I think the commissioner talked about a plan coming out mid-June. And so that should help us have some more information. The need for, personal protective equipment. What does that look like? What are the guidelines? What do we have to provide versus what do we expect families to provide? And so there are a lot of things that we need to consider when coming back, coming back into the district.
It would now be the best time to take questions from the committee.
Yeah, that works, Julie.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. Does anyone have any questions on overall or different segments of these working groups? I'll get started while other people are thinking of their questions. Are we, from an operational standpoint, are we also thinking of how we might utilize spaces in different ways? So for example, if we're not able to have all of the children in the music room, instead of utilizing that room as a classroom so you could have it more spread out, or using the cafeteria at different sorts of ways to gain square footage in the building, how we wouldn't have used it previously, but we might use it under this new scenario.
Sure. Julie, we have, and we are, right? And part of, because then when we come back, it's going to require that. We'll have to have a clean room and a dirty room. We'll have to have meaning for the nurse to come in. So that right away says we have to re-envision how we're currently using our current space. If we think about the high school, the French class is about 24 kids. It's 700 square feet. That means I can have 12 bodies in there, maybe. I don't know, right? And then how do you schedule that? And so that may mean that instead we take those 24 kids and we put them in a small theater. We have to envision that, but the scheduling idea of that without knowing what the parameters are is where we're struggling, right? We can only go so far until we know more from the state.
Suzanne, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a bunch, but I'll just start off with one or two, if that's okay. Are we considering the safety? I know you are considering the safety of the staff, but there may well be students who are health compromised and were not able to attend, and there may be staff who are also compromised and not able to be in the building. So are we also thinking about that, and what are we thinking about?
Yeah, it's funny, not funny. Coincidentally, the commissioner talked about that today too. And one thing he recommended in terms of staff was surveying your staff to see who is immunocompromised or who is in a life situation where they could put those around them at risk. And those may be the staff who teach remotely and don't come in physically. So that's one piece is we'd love to be able to survey staff to see, just so we have a better idea of who would actually be willing to come in. And then from the student side, Trisha and I have talked a bunch about this too. We've already had a couple of families with immunocompromised students say, until there's a vaccine, I'm not going to send my kids to school, even if you open up regardless if it's September or January. And this is where the flexibility that Nicole talked about has to come into play, because I believe it was in Israel where they opened up and 40% of the families decided to not send them. I might be stealing your stats here, Sharon, now that I think about it. But 40% of the families decided to not send their students. I don't know whether or not they had a backup plan, but we need to plan for families who don't want to send their kids, even if they are healthy, and for kids to come in the building if in fact we are allowed to open up our buildings. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's being more prepared for the worst.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you could survey families too about whether, but people don't know yet. We don't know how we're going to be feeling in the end of August. So
yeah, I mean, that's the piece that Khalees was speaking to, right? Is we can operate off of the guidance that we have today, which is, no more than 10, everybody wears a mask, but that may look different come end of August.
Yeah.
Right. I know that what I saw today on the commissioner's call in the chat box, that someone talked about the state of New Hampshire has done surveys of families, and then districts are actually doing their own more specified surveys. But my team, the academic team, is certainly anticipating that we will have remote learning available for students who are unable to return, and likely the staff who are unable to return might be involved in that.
Further questions, Helen? And then Barbara, I think you were wanting to speak next. Was that a hand? Or...
So Casey spoke to it a little bit, but we are somewhat fortunate that there are other countries that are starting to open up and, experiencing things. And how much are we looking at what's happening internationally to help us?
That's a great question. So when we started on May 13th, we actually sent out some pre-reading for folks, and then have since also sent out links for folks to read about the different countries. South Korea was one that we looked at a lot in terms of their model. Denmark, I mentioned Israel, a bunch of other, whatever's out there. We've been doing reading and looking to see, would this fit Brookline?
Yeah.
Right. And just if I could follow up, are we also thinking outside the box that maybe it'll be, for instance, BEEP and kindergarten that come back in 10th and 11th grade, and everybody else gets remote for a couple months or something like that?
Yeah.
I guess just let me finish and then
sorry.
I want to hear what you have to say. The one thing I worry about with BEEP and kindergarten, really hard to do that with kids who've never been in school and don't know their teachers, especially at that age. So that would be my one thought about that area, that we might want to think about ways that those kids could come back first.
Yeah, there's thinking about what populations do we bring back first? The youngest students, and do we have the youngest students in select buildings? And then we have our more high need students who are at risk of even becoming even more disengaged from school. We have some students who have not availed themselves to any learning opportunities since we closed. We've reached out, but we can't make them sit in front of a monitor, right? We can't make them answer the phone, or even in some cases, they're not always available to come to the door. And so identifying what is the neediest population there, but also our youngest learners. Obviously some countries have done that and have done that well. One thing the commissioner talked about too is it's harder for younger kids to keep their masks on. And one of the guidelines may be that kids have to keep their masks on all day long, which is really hard, as especially for our buildings that don't have AC. When we come back in September, it's still pretty warm in there. So we have to consider that too. There are more manipulatives in smaller classrooms. And so what are the cleaning procedures and cleaning protocols, not just for cleaning all the manipulatives, but how often do the kids need to get up, wash their hands, which we can obviously schedule into a schedule, but it's the real granular thinking here that will, I think, influence how we decide what those populations are.
So lucky we have sinks in every room up until 6th grade.
Further questions, Barbara or David? Jennifer, you haven't had a chance to speak yet. Sharon?
I don't have so much a question as a comment. I keep thinking about younger children who can there are certain ways we can deal with that, but it's harder for younger children not to be in touch with one another, to keep all of the rules in the back of their heads so that they don't do things that are harmful to them. And I keep thinking, how do we ever get that to happen? Because it's not, well, if it doesn't happen, we'll deal with it, because then they might expose other children or do things that aren't good for their health. So how do we really deal with the education of the youngest children who are not necessarily used to protocols of school and who may have less ability to deal with the rigidity of it? It is a fairly rigid way that you have to behave, because you can't get close to people, you have to wear your mask. It worries me a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, I'm going to go out of turn for 1 second just to speak. So I have a 5-year-old who will be an incoming kindergartner. And this is one of the things I think is such a huge challenge as we think about the youngest students. And also too, just how hard it is to be training them and teaching them that you can't touch other people. And like it's just really all very complicated and hard. So, all right, others? Jennifer, I saw your hand.
No, actually, my questions have already been asked, and I think the questions that I have remaining, we don't have answers to yet. So, I have lots of questions, and we're not in a place where we can really, yeah.
What we have found in leading the groups is the principals are the question askers. They want to know every little detail. And the three of us, because they run buildings, right? So they're thinking through all the little pieces. And the three of us, because we always meet afterwards to debrief and plan for the following week, is we have to remind folks too that there's a lot of gray area and we have to be okay with it, because we still have to move this forward. We still have to put some recommendations out there to the committee. And to the superintendent. And so we have to be okay with not answering all of the questions right now.
Sharon?
I'd like to know what kind of support you're getting in these discussions from the Department of Public Health in Brookline.
Yeah, so we have a number of folks who reach out to Dr. Swanee Jett, and he's been pretty speedy in terms of getting answers back to us. Tricia Laham also serves on the COVID task force. So she provides updates to us, and we will flow questions through her too. That's what we have been getting thus far. I imagine as we get closer in terms of planning the protocols, we'll reach out to them more.
Anything further?
Yes, just have a question. You mentioned about that principals are asking a lot of questions. Are they providing any feedback or advice as to how they would envision or listening?
I would say in my group, and I can't imagine for Dr. Gittens and Casey's as well, that absolutely they are engaged in the conversation, thinking through, and they're doing the reading as well. Like we have a running document, and everyone adds in new resources as they come across them, and they want to know the answers. And so, yes, very much so. They even want us to spread this conversation as wide as possible. And so I imagine that the experience I'm having in operations, Casey and Nicole are having as well.
Are there any specific recommendations that you're seeing a pattern of that are being made?
Not specific recommendations besides give me the answer. I want to know the detail, right? Like that I think is common that we're all experiencing, that there's a high level of anxiety of what will this look like and how will I do it? I think there's one aspect that hasn't come up in this conversation that we at some point will need to be truly concerned with, and that is staffing, right? And as I've read articles, will we have teachers that come back? There are a lot of places that have reopened and teachers have resigned because this is not how they understand education to be. So when you think about that, you think about the difficulty of getting substitute teachers pre-COVID, what will it look like? And if we're doing half the population or half the day, how much more bodies, adult bodies, will we need, right? That's a huge concern. And if we design a model, but the town next door doesn't have a model that coincides with our model, and our teachers live there who are also parents, on one hand, you're saying you can't, I guess I feel really strongly that we can't operate without keeping that in the back of our mind. Because on one hand, I'm hiring a teacher, but to pretend that our teachers aren't parents as well would do us a disservice. And so that's another thing that I think is bringing principals a lot of anxiety.
On my end, we're hearing about like the possibility of scheduling, because we do want to make sure right now, not every school has a schedule. People are doing what works for them. It's a challenge to make that happen, but our service providers and our specialists, our interventionists, literacy, math, and EL are finding catch as catch can in some situations where they're really trying to figure out a time to work with kids and how can they pull small groups together that don't conflict with other teacher schedules.
So now, what do we have as thoughts about timeline and, where there is so much gray, but we do have to, especially as we're thinking about budget considerations for some of these things, what are the thoughts on timeline and where the recommendations will be ready to be considered by the school committee?
So as I shared with you at the last school committee meeting, that June 19th is when these planning groups would bring something, in terms of the form of recommendations or / plan to the committee, knowing, as we said then and still today, that things won't be cut in stone at that point. They can't be. As I think Dr. Giddens said earlier, today the commissioner announced that he will not give out draft guidance until the middle of June. And we obviously have to pay close attention to that and adjust as necessary. So, but we at this point still intend to stick to our original plan and what we reported to you, which was these groups would report to the committee with some real recommendations on June 19th. You also do want to, would it be great to get update or have the committee updated about the task force that are being pulled together? Because we do, as we said 2 weeks ago, want to make sure that, that those groups that are being convened by the school committee are also helping inform the work as we go in, June into July.
Okay. Helen, I saw you had your hand up, and then Sharon.
Just a quick question, because I agree with Khalees and what she said, that we have to be doing this in concert with our other communities nearby, because otherwise teachers won't be able to teach. Have we had contact with Newton, with Cambridge, with any of the other districts to see what they're planning?
So I want to update the committee. I can't remember if I've updated folks on this or not. The opportunity we had to work cross districts with district manager group fell through for a variety of reasons, partly cost, partly that they couldn't convene those districts. I have not been in touch in the last few days or since last week with any of the superintendents. So I've not done that outreach. Nicole, I'm not sure if you've reached out through some of your, role-alike colleagues. But we need to and will.
Yeah, so we're trying to get ourselves together. Everybody is like super swamped. And so we're random emailing kind of quick conversations, but nothing concrete. One of the things that I think is, can we have one of the things that the folks on all of our committees are asking about is the all call that went out for experts in remote learning. And so we'd like to know where we are with that. Do we have any people? What are the expectations? What's happening with that?
Susan or Sharon, could you give us an update on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. I don't want to lose the opportunity to ask my other question though. So we received an initial, I'd say group of about 20 or 30 applicants prior to the larger all call that went out yesterday in order to reach the entire parent community. Since we sent out the larger all call, I think we've probably received about 50 more applications since 6 o'clock this morning. So we have a huge amount of interest from experts in the community with public health backgrounds, remote learning, ed tech, pedagogy, recreation, special education, wellness, et cetera. So I feel very confident that those committees will be constituted and that they will be really helpful and valuable. But, we are continuing to receive applications, and we're going to have to form those committees probably in the next few days. Can I ask my question now?
You can. Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks. So Ben, I'd like to urge you and also get a sense of the committee on this. I'm listening to what Felice and Casey and Nicole are saying, and it sounds as though all of the discussions that are taking place involve that have significant budgetary impacts, from staffing to materials to possible space allocations to the need for additional professional development. I remain concerned about the fact that the school committee, who ultimately has responsibility for authorizing the budget and for authorizing any significant changes or cuts to programs or creations of additional capacities, doesn't have any visibility into this and isn't going to get any visibility into this until right at town meeting time. I'm not exactly sure what the date is for town meeting. I would like to suggest as one possible solution, although I'm open to others, that members of the finance subcommittee be tied into these groups so that at least we can be apprising the school committee about some of the budgetary implications of the conversations that are going on so that we can start to get our ducks in a row. Because we are, some of what is being discussed here will have budgetary impacts in the order of millions and millions of dollars. And we can't get hit with that in the last week of June. That's not, and it's not necessarily clear that those additional costs would necessarily be taxable under emergency COVID funding, right? Especially if they're more specific to educational program or educational systems. So can we just have a conversation about that as a committee?
Does anyone else have thoughts on that?
So I do, right? I don't know if I have thoughts as much as I have questions. And the call for experts around this, I see as we discussed earlier on a previous call, as support. That's an effort to support the work that we're doing in these committees. I guess I wonder, how will we use those committees, and will they come together after we've done some work? And then are they joining us, or are we showing them what we've done? Or are they looking at our plan and then saying, no, that won't work because of this, or this is a better, more effective way to do it? Like, I guess I can't understand how to get the best use out of that when the starting lines are so vastly different.
So I think that that's a really important point, and I appreciate that comment. I also want to say that I too am disappointed that we are getting off to such a late start by bringing in the experts from our community. But at the same time, I don't want to risk losing the opportunity of having their input, not just necessarily in the month of June, but also all the way through the end of 2020, where, these issues are going to continue to be relevant. I think that what's been made really clear to the committee by the superintendent is that the superintendent doesn't want, a group of, public citizens, sort of taking up the very precious time of our senior level administrators when they have so many demands that are, confronting them. And the commitment was that we were going to set them up essentially as an advisory body that would generate recommendations, and that an appropriate pathway to communicate with each of your subgroups would be established in a way that was non-burdensome to the subgroups. I'm not going to speak for Susan here. I'm quite open to re-engaging with that discussion, right? Like, we could conceivably have these committees, substantively formed probably by early next week, and they could be off to the races talking to you about, the ongoing discussions that you're having, and they could potentially make them much more efficient, right? Because they may have a range of, insights and knowledge and expertise, that don't just generate questions, but also have answers. On the flip side, they don't necessarily have the institutional awareness about like what's happening in PSB and what the constraints are. And that's something that needs to be considered. So I do think that there needs to be a conversation between the subgroup leaders and the superintendent about how to make these groups most useful to you. We are providing them to you so that you can draw on their expertise, and that's that. There's a lot of hands going up.
I just want to, there's one point I want to make, and then I'll let others speak, but just specifically the 70 plus applications we've gotten, they're incredible. They really are. And I'm even trying to think about whether or not we can just sort of send them around so people can take a look at the caliber of people who are in this community and willing to help us, all of us collectively. So I'll just read you like a couple sentences. I'm the Associate Medical Director of Boston's Children's Hospital, responsible for all COVID testing for our hospital. All of COVID testing for Boston Children's Hospital. I'm collaborating with other groups working on COVID-19 testing throughout the city. I'm trained in infectious diseases, and I'm a parent in X school. I've also CC'd parent in Y school. She is one of the leaders in infectious disease prevention and control at the Brigham and Women's. In addition to being an ID clinician, she has been responsible for infection prevention and control work in both locations during COVID. We are both personally interested in contributing our expertise wherever we can. And, I just read that and, my heart got big, right? My heart got a little bigger. And I thought, what a wonderful statement that we have people like this who are parents in our district. How lucky are we? And how can we, and there are 70 of them, there really are. And, we're not picking 70 people. Nobody wants to create a big nightmare process. You guys are doing such incredible, just the bubbling up of questions and thinking through, like kneading the dough and everything. I have thought a lot about your question, Khalees, about what is the best way to bring these, bring the best of the community to these questions and bring the questions that we have that are to the best of the community and how we do that. So just to say, I don't have the right answer yet, but I think we should figure it out because, boy, if shame on us if we can't figure out a way collectively to leverage just the incredible skill out there. Someone, was responsible for setting up the remote learning for, impressive stuff. And I just and they want to be helpful. They want to be helpful. So I really appreciate your question. I appreciate the work. And I think it's really the right question to ask.
So Susan and Sharon, would it be helpful if we sent you a list of topics where we really don't have expertise in the groups to help inform how you'll select members? And then from there, our groups are big. And so they're splitting off into even smaller groups as they answer questions on X, Y, and Z. And so it would be helpful if group X comes together and they meet with experts in X. to ask the questions and run ideas through them.
Absolutely. And hopefully the experts will say, have you thought about this? And we'll say no. And we'll say, we have this question. And they'll say, oh my gosh, it's a great question. I never thought of that. That we'll really get that. I mean, I wonder if we can actually even just find some way to just put these into PDF so that you can take a look at them, because my guess is that you've already, if you were to read them with the lens of the questions you've been already having and talking about, you might pick out different things. So you can sort of take a look at them. We'll probably be doing it this weekend because we have a meeting on June 1st, I think, right? We have a school committee meeting on June 1st that we're going to try to, I think we're targeting, right, Sharon, to try to get these, so it's due at 5 o'clock Friday, and our meeting is whatever time on June 1st. So it's a quick turnaround, but at any rate, it would be great to figure that out. So if you want, right, there are 70 of them, but if you want, happy to send them through.
There's 70 of them as of today. Yeah, we still have two. Like the night is young. Yeah, like we'll probably get another 30 by midnight. Okay, so I mean, we just have like a very extraordinary group of people. I do want to say that it sounds like, listen, I think that what I'm hearing from parents and what I'm hearing from educators and what I'm hearing from the school committee is that we don't want just like a solution. We want a great solution, right? And there's nobody who's more committed to that than our community members and our parents, right? Because if there's an infectious disease specialist who's about to send their kid back into a school, they want that school to be running right, and they want the education that their kids are receiving there to be best in class, right? So I think that if there is a way that we could start to take some steps to like break down some of the kind of communication, barriers between what's happening on the administration side and what's happening in the community and school committee side, I think we can start to expedite this engagement a lot faster.
I'm out of order. Can I jump in? I wonder if, like, I know that that my group is putting a list of questions together, of questions that we have to answer in order to support operations. And I wonder if we gave you a list of those questions or summarized them somehow and said, could you have someone give us some good thinking around this? That may be more helpful, or that may be a way to get us started at beyond the start line.
It's such a great point. The other thing I was thinking is that we can't have 70 people on 4 task forces.
Yeah.
But we can, I was thinking like a small handful so that they're manageable and they can schedule meetings because they're subject to open meeting law as well. But even if we said, all right, here's the 70 people, let's just get their name, rank, serial number, their area of expertise, and put them on our speed dial and create a little mini, mailing list so that when, call for X, here's our question, somebody respond to me, right? And that way we get 70 people's brains, even if we're only having them meet. Okay, yeah. So this is the thing that would be great to not take up everyone's time because we're going to be here super late tonight. But yes, great, fantastic.
So it might be, and perhaps the 3, Casey, Nicole, and Khalees, it might make sense to offline have a conversation sometime this weekend with Susan and Sharon. Maybe if they've culled through first round, that might be the most effective way to get the targeted approach that, of research.
Yeah, either that or if we can get them to you guys at 5 o'clock Friday and schedule a meeting for Monday, we don't have to do a weekend phone call, but you can take a look at them at your leisure, at your extraordinary amounts of leisure time. And we can schedule some time Monday if you have thoughts and want to share them before we finalize things, because that would be fantastic, really fantastic.
Right. So the next, if we don't have anything else, it sounds there is a lot of great work coming and so many questions and much more discussion in this area will continue. But I do think for tonight, we're probably at a place where we can move to the next thing on our agenda. Does that make sense? Yes.
I'm sorry, I just had one question. When schools closed this spring, Governor Baker declared all schools would close. Are we expecting the governor to declare what's going to happen this fall? Or, I'm sure the guidelines aren't going to do that.
Yes, the commissioner said today, which is consistent with how he's operated before, is they'll be giving guidelines, and they also expect to leave quite a bit of leeway for local districts. I don't know where and what areas, obviously, but so we don't. I imagine some things will be determined, some things won't be determined, like they've done the whole way through. The only consistent determination, was the actual closure.
Right.
And so I don't know if they'll. Yeah, so I expect it to be quite a wide range, and maybe some specific guidance on certain areas, on a limited number of areas, I guess.
Okay, thanks.
Suzanne, I think this is played out legally in the construction realm, that like the governor is able to declare, like he is able to close everything but can't open, and vice versa. So there are also like there is guidance on to where directives can come from. So I think that the school can be closed, but I don't know that it can be declared opened in the same way. I believe that it's the districts can decide for safety of their communities to be more restrictive. And so I do believe that you can't go the flip and force everyone to be opened or force further. So I don't know if someone wants to look into that. I do know that it's played out in the construction realm so far since COVID has happened. Yes, Sharon?
Ben, can you speak to how this is being discussed at the Brookline COVID Task Force? Because ultimately, a lot of the decisions that will inform whether or not we do reopen will come down to public health and municipal support, and not just whatever it is that we can provide within the school department.
No, I cannot. I'm not attending those meetings and have for quite some time. Mary Ellen and Tricia Laham are the ones who are representing us at the task force at this point.
Just to state the obvious, this has come up, I shouldn't say it's obvious, to the people who hang out and do nothing but town Zooms. The town school partnership meeting is happening every Friday at noon. Jump in, the water's warm, you're welcome to come. We are talking about this issue. We're trying to raise this to the select board members and in the advisory committee. Sharon and I have had individual conversations with people. We've had group conversations, but the ability to do this will, I don't know if anyone thinks we can do it with just our staff, manpower, person power. We certainly can't do it with the funds available. And there are COVID funds that have not been included in the budget. The $6 million gap that we've been given. There are additional funds outside of that. So there are just a lot of moving parts. And I think it's important for someone to be really kind of tied in pretty closely, because just as, we didn't close the schools by ourselves, we're not going to open them by ourselves, right? It was a conversation and a number of conversations I know, and that you and Mel had with Swanee, Dr. Jett beforehand. So it may be the kind of thing where we just need to figure out for the next 6 weeks what that looks like, and just make sure it's someone's top priority, given how busy Mary Ellen is and how many planes you're trying to land right now, Ben. So we should think about that, Julie and Suzanne.
Yes, Sharon, last point.
Yeah, it would just be great if whoever is attending the COVID task force meetings, if they could join us at the next school committee meeting so that we could engage with them directly around this. Because I think that one of the issues that needs to be brought to the center of concern for the task force is that if there's an outbreak in schools, the town will shut down for weeks, right? And the schools are part of the town, and all of us share public health together, right? So we really need to be having that level of direct engagement urgently, I think.
Absolutely. And just to make that point with, the whole point about, we're trying to plan, as Khalid said, where we don't even know the parameters, and we will learn some things over the summer. And then sometime around October, the whole thing is going to get, blown up anyway. So we're going to be starting over. So I think we're not going to really know how this is going is probably going to be, that is the status quo for the next, year. So just figuring out how to plan as flexibly as possible, given that is going to be our status.
So speaking of the summer, I'm glad you brought that up. Are these task force looking at this summer? Are we thinking of having in-person classes? Is that a trial run to be able to do with smaller amounts of kids or not? I see you making a face, Sharon, so you can speak.
I haven't heard anything.
I'm asking the question.
So, the remote learning task force has not addressed the question of summers. We are expecting that the expert advisory groups will be meeting over the summer, but I think that the decision about whether or not to open, like for ESY program, I think that the ESY question has already been resolved, and then I don't know what's going on with summer school or anything else.
Has it?
Summer school and summer programming that are happening in July are remote. Decision already made. When I spoke with Josh Paris and the team that works on Calc Project, they're doing their program in August, and so they'd like the option, if possible, to do at least some part of it in person. But again, we're waiting for guidance from the health department before making that decision. I think what has been hard is in the beginning we were asking people to try to plan for both, and it's just too complicated to plan for being in person or being remote. And so the decision had to be made for our for Project Discovery and for BHS Summer School to remain remote.
Okay, thank you.
And then Casey, could you give an update on ESY planning?
Sure. So parents will receive a letter by the end of this week, I think it is, that we are going to plan for a remote ESY and have very small in-person service delivery for a very small population, but we're starting to identify, beginning to identify who those students are and whether or not they would be in-home services or that we would utilize a school. Again, a lot of it is unknown in terms of whether or not we can use the school buildings, what does cleaning look like, what staff do we have? We've already have some providers tell us, I'm not going to continue doing remote, I'm done, I need a break. So we are losing service providers too.
Yes, Sharon, I'm going to call on Sharon last, but our meeting is already going to go to 1 a.m. And so I just want to keep everybody mindful of that. We had 3 school committee meetings in the last month go to 1 a.m. and I love you guys, but this is getting to be quite a lot. So Sharon,
Casey,
the last thing.
This is a question for Casey with regard to in-person services. Is it our current plan that we're going to be asking teachers to get tested for COVID, or that we will be testing them for COVID prior to sending them out for in-person services?
So we talked very briefly about that, and we don't know what what our resources are in terms of testing folks ourselves.
All right, Ben, I'm going to ask you to take us into, Ben and Mary Ellen, to take us into conversation about budget, but I do want to premise this part of the meeting by saying that we are having another school committee meeting next Monday, where we will be talking specifically about the FY21 budget recommendations. And so the bulk of the presentation and conversation will take place on Monday. So we're going to give, Ben's going to give a preview today, but I'm going to set everyone's expectations that this will be a brief part of tonight's meeting.
Yeah, so thank you, Julie. The first part will be for Mary Ellen, a brief update on the FY 2020 efforts to close the FY 2020 budget with no deficit. We'll give you and really the public an update on the efforts we're taking, and then most of which you already know, but the public may not. And then I will give you a summary overview of how we're developing the FY 21 budget. Marilyn, go ahead. Marilyn, do you need to share a document or share your screen or like that, or you're on mute? Still on mute. You've been on mute.
Click it twice. I uploaded a document for you in the folder where the docket shows. I will show it if you'd like, but I'd rather talk through it. There's not too many numbers. I've been spending time in terms of kind of what our actions and what our options are based on the conversation that we had with Mel Kleckner, town administrator, and Melissa Goff, deputy town administrator. So right now, the amount of money carried in the operating budget for COVID-19 related expenses that are potentially eligible for FEMA and MEMA is roughly about $450,000. and roughly around 225,000 is in the food service revolving fund. And so I wanted to go through kind of what the action steps that we've been taking and what is still in the works and kind of what our different options are going forward to land a balanced budget at the end of the year. So for action so far with the operating budget, we froze the budget on April 8th. We're reducing purchase orders, canceling orders. We've frozen vacant positions that have become open. We've released the circuit breaker funds to be expended in full. Senior staff is reviewing all purchasing requests for essential purchasing. And right now we're still holding about 570,000 of the original 960 for unanticipated and unknown expenditures, of which they pop up periodically. In terms of options for our operating budget, we are waiting for guidance from the Division of Local Services on how to handle these expenses. So we do seem to have agreement with from Town School Partnership and from Mel Kleckner and Melissa Goff that if our budget deficit is equal to that of our COVID eligible expenses, that's okay, because we may not know till after June 30th how to transfer those over. So that will be a negative number that we'll keep updating as we identify expenditures. Right now, in terms of the circuit breaker, we're waiting for reclassification of purchase orders to be done to the circuit breaker account to fully encumber that account and relieve the operating budget so we can show that relief. We are working on reconciling our grants. We had some staffing personnel budget deficits that we were identifying in the beginning of the year, and we're isolating those and continuing to fix those. And some of those will hit the operating budget. And those kind of fall under the unanticipated and unknown because they should have been resolved with amendments to balance out those accounts. Grants, as we've talked about, grants need to stop, assuming the operating budget will pick up their overages and staff. And we're putting budget process in place for those. With BEEP, we have a combination of lost revenue and reconciliation of payroll and staffing that needs to be shifted to the operating budget that's special ed related. One of the options that we talked to Mel Kleckner and Melissa Goff about was amortizing the deficit over a period of time, a loan, rightfully asking the question about laying off employees that are in a revolving fund. That's what they've done with the recreation and library and some of their fee-based funds, is doing furloughs and layoffs of those externally funded positions. And with rental facilities, again, loss of rentals with not renting our building since March. And again, same kind of question, they would be able to amortize that. They also did a loan for the recreation, actually the golf course about 20 years ago, which the golf course is still paying off. So that is an option that has been also kind of mentioned. I think more discussion will need to happen once we know what that is. The school lunch, that one is currently about $225,000 of expenses related to delivering and preparing meals for under the free and reduced lunch low income status, and the deficit of that program is significantly is larger than that. It's about double. In March we were just breaking a little bit, doing better than breaking even, and had kind of were in recovery mode with food service, and then the pandemic hit and we've slid back. We've also, so the same options for BEEP and rental facilities in terms of either a loan or amortizing it. What, we would all hope for is some sort of forgiveness of this deficit. That doesn't seem to be in the works, but both Mel Kleckner and and Melissa encouraged us to consider the reserve fund for and making that request and doing that in June, and then doing also in July. Their last meeting is July 7th, so it could be that they defer us to July 7th.
Mary Ellen, how is it that we could go for a reserve fund transfer in July? You close, right?
So to close, yeah. So technically, under Massachusetts statute, the last payment and transfers and activity can happen July 15th. So that may be a Sunday, so it would be July 16th, where it can be charged to the closing fiscal year. So there's roughly, 10 work days after the 30th that we do a lot of cleanup and posting and getting things corrected that were occurred in the prior fiscal year to close the books. But after July 15th, we can't make any charges against the prior year. So that's just an accounting mechanism that has been in place for decades. Committee may or may not be aware, as I lost Jeremy Stull in April. So I have contacted a retired school business administrator to assist me with some of the end of year reconciliations and with funds. And we kind of backfilled his role in my office with Susanna McCormick DeBoer has been helping out with payroll and keeping payroll running. But we need another level of expertise. So she started today, worked with Donna Chisholm in my office. And so we'll be getting about 10 to 15 hours a week from her to help me with the reconciliations and some of the timeliness that you would all like to have and receive. And then also in the document, I provided you with the due dates of FEMA and MEMA applications, CARES Act applications, both for town and school, and then a number of links to DESE guidance that we've been following all along. And I think it's important for sort of history questions in terms of what kind of guidance were we following and when were we following it, and sort of how did we get to where we are. And so DESE has been encouraging many districts to continue paying employees, paying private schools, paying contractors, making sure vendors are going to be in business for September, and the like. So I just provided you with a number of links that actually impacted some of our decision making and those that are coming up. So we are working very hard at trying to get to solid ground. And so we've had a number of things shift in the last week. We just, every day is we're processing things every day. So I wanted to at least share with you that roughly about the school department is committed and provided is $675,000 of expenses to most of that's in custodial and food service hours and time. We have additional $36,000 in translations that we've done as a result of our various activities and support. And we have roughly over $100,000 in additional software applications or changes in our applications. So that detail, I've provided some of that previously, but those are the new updates on where those funds are.
Mary Ellen,
so that's my update for 20.
These are in the Google Drive? You said you.
So I provided an update to where the docket is. The detail of the 675, I can load that at this meeting. I did not break that down. That part of that was in the last week's meeting. I had it broken down in last week's meeting, and it's mostly the payroll that updated and translations that were new.
And is this the document that we would then provide for town school partnership on Friday? Because these are the expenses that we would be able to submit for MEMA and FEMA? Yeah.
Yes. And again, still working on getting solid numbers that sort of where our deficit is. also. So I'm working on it daily.
And do we expect, based on the next, I know that previously the 27th, there are dates that are payroll payouts, and so it seems, and purchase order reconciliation dates. Are we expecting that for the 4th that we would have that, or on next Monday?
So the 4th, the 4th, you would have an update that would be pretty solid. If I did something on Monday, it could, I'm not sure. I think I'm running into analysis on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is kind of squishy because payroll gets run on Monday and closes sometime on Tuesday, posts on Wednesday, and the warrants are done, and those don't all get posted and cleared until Thursday. So there's some squishiness that happens in terms of how Munis functions, that's creating enough of a variable that I'm not feeling like not feeling confident in the accuracy, because there's some it's just because of the timing of the posting on the financial application.
All right. Does anyone have any questions about the action plan, the financial action plan that's in the docket folder, or anything else that Mary Ellen had to say today?
No, I think that if we are going to ask the advisory committee for a reserve fund transfer, we need to have a pretty substantial conversation before that, because I can imagine a bunch of questions that we will have, and that we want to get our everyone on the same page on the school side before we go in.
Uh-huh. So, Julie, in terms of Monday, as I'm kind of processing and thinking, is that Monday information would be really as of tomorrow. So, as opposed to as of Monday. I've been trying to actually do things more in real time, and I think I found this week that wasn't a good strategy. So Monday would be for whatever settled out for tomorrow and posted tomorrow, and that would be Monday, as opposed to through Monday, for example.
So Monday information would be what we know as of the end of this week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that to make sure that we're on solid, reliable footing.
Thank you.
That's what I learned this week in my wanting to be responsive and getting information to you timely and accurate.
Just Susan, I think we have a finance subcommittee meeting on Friday morning at 8, right?
If we need it.
Okay.
I guess it depends on how effective we are between now and 1 a.m. So, all right, on that then, let's turn to FY21. And again, just the understanding that this is a brief update because we will be giving your full recommendations just on Monday in a couple days.
Right. Robin, could you make me the presenter, please? Great. Right. So I do want to go over for the committee, but also especially the public who are listening, a few areas that we are working on in terms of the budget. Most specifically, we always are trying to, with the lack of a strategic plan in the district, we are still trying to always build a budget and make decisions based on our mission and core values, which you see here. I would say the mission that Brookline has had in place for many, many years is more relevant than ever, considering the nature of the global connection through this pandemic, and how participating thoughtfully in a society, succeeding in diversity involving global society, and also questions about how to pursue a productive and fulfilling life are probably more relevant than ever. In terms of just updating folks, especially the public, around the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our fiscal situation. everyone knows that I presented a balanced budget recommendation in April. Since then, on May 15th, just a few weeks later, the town directed PSB to create a new FY 2021 budget that reduces the FY 21 total revenue that we have available, that the schools have the ability to spend, by $6.3 million. The new total for our revenue that we can spend of just over $119.5 million is actually below our FY 20 total revenue by $300,000. So at this point, myself and my staff and the committee are tasked with identifying cuts, reductions, and savings that total $6.3 million on top of our previously identified reductions. Just like everything during this pandemic, that is an onerous and complicated task, made more so by the timing of it. If any district was trying to make a 5% cut and knew about that in November or December or January, it could be part of the typical budget process. But we are faced with doing this very quickly in the months of May and June, as we have a number of deadlines bearing down upon us. So the scenario, the sort of how we're building the budget here is based on a number of circumstances, uncertainties, and priorities. I want to remind not only the committee but the public that at this point we do not have clear or concrete information on how we will open in September and what school will look like. Folks heard today the update on our planning and the work we're doing. We are, as Susan and Sharon talked about, going to get some tremendous expert help from the community. But still, at this point, no school system has clear, concrete information about how they will open in September, and nor do we. The Department of Education, an announcement by the commissioner today, doesn't plan to share draft guidance. I don't mean like defined guidance, but draft guidance until mid-June. And that will obviously affect our planning, our staffing, and therefore our budget as well. Information around the learning model, health, safety, learning approach is changing and will likely change throughout the summer. So we'll have to be flexible in all of those areas, including budgeting. And we also have two very specific deadlines approaching very quickly that affect all of our planning, our budgeting, our staffing, and decision making. The first deadline is on May 30th, which is in our collective bargaining agreement with the Brookline Educators Union, and that any staff that face the possibility of getting laid off must be notified by May 13th. We've already had an extension of that deadline from May 15th to May 30th, which we worked through with the BEU. But we do have to hit that deadline and abide by our contract. And then the other piece is just the town's process on budget, which again has already been delayed because of the fiscal crisis. And our staff and the school committee are faced with needing to complete a budget by next week so that it can be presented to the select board, advisory committee, and eventually town meeting towards the end of June. So we are under extreme uncertainty and extreme urgency. The next two slides I want to share with the public and the school committee because they have a bunch of assumptions that we're using as we develop the budget, which we'll present on Monday. We expect that part of the year next year will be spent in a remote learning environment and part of it will be spent in a hybrid learning environment. We don't know yet at this point, obviously, which will happen, or if we will go back and forth between those two very basic approaches. We do expect that any remote learning environment will be strengthened from what we're doing today. It'll be more coherent, more concrete, and more specific in terms of how we do it across grades, across the district, across schools. We do want to make sure that we are doing it in a more, I'll say, efficient way, for lack of a better term. At this point, we have all teachers really trying to do all pieces. That means develop curriculum, develop synchronous learning sessions, asynchronous learning sessions, remote learning opportunities, call resources, and that is making, even though teachers are working together in teams, especially within schools, it's still making duplicate work for many folks. We want to hopefully develop a strategy and a practice where we can develop things with smaller groups of people that can be used by larger groups of people. And that could be in any subject area. That could be in, K-5 math. That could be in world language in the middle grades. That could be in visual arts at the high school, world language, in other areas by either department or by grade level, depending what part of the system we're working on. We want to continue to provide music, art, and wellness instruction remotely. We may look at de-emphasizing those to some way or scaling them back. So we still, our students all have these opportunities, but they may be provided a system-wide approach as opposed to specific classes done by specific teachers or specific courses, school by school, grade by grade. And then the last piece here is that it's very, very important that as we build the budget, we allow for contingencies. As we discussed earlier tonight, and that planning discussion was a great lead into this budget presentation, is we have to remain flexible on our budget. We'll incur costs that we don't know of yet. We'll have staffing models that aren't defined yet. And so it makes sense to identify savings or reductions maybe in excess of $6.3 million. So we have flexibility in our budget to apply it as things come up during the year. The last area on this is some of our priorities as we are trying to piece together this FY21 budget under this uncertainty. And that is, we certainly want to preserve and maintain special education staff, including special educational paraprofessionals. These folks are doing a great job right now. They continue to strengthen their work and the support of special education students. And we want to make sure that we have all hands on deck from these folks to support our students with disabilities, particularly providing small group instruction, support, and guidance to them as we go forward into next year. We certainly want to preserve social, emotional, and health support, including all of our guidance counselors, our social workers, our psychologists, and nurses. We certainly want to prioritize and preserve spending on areas that are more important than ever next year. That includes educational technology, software and hardware, and professional development and use of technology. And then we want to make sure we continue the rollout of our new K-8 math curriculum is going exceedingly well as we sort of complete the second year of this cycle. And we want to make sure that we do not let up on that. We want to complete it, make sure our teachers are trained and supported in developing and using that new math curriculum. We don't want to step away from that either. It's very, very important that we support all of our learners and support approaches longstanding approaches within the district that support equity. And that's including, but not limited to, English language education, our MEDCO program, and sepsis success as just examples of areas that we want to preserve that support equity. And as mentioned before, we really do want to allow for contingency planning and building in some buffer within the budget that allows for that. Those are important, and as we finalize the budget and put it together for a presentation on Monday, you will see these priorities reflected in our budget recommendations. This just shows, this shows some of the numbers. Just to highlight a couple, you'll see that our total revenue from FY20, as I mentioned before, is about $300,000 more than our total revenue that's available to us this year. That is a almost $6.4 million reduction from the budget we presented really about a month and a half ago. That's a 5.1% cut from what we expected. Many folks may ask, how come if we have the same revenue, a similar revenue in FY21 as we did in FY20, why we'd actually have to cut $6.4 million? It's a very good question. And this slide is intended to explain that and show that. So if we have similar amount of funding in FY20, why do we have to find so many reductions for FY21? The way our budget in any school or really any school district budget is typically built is there are some mandatory expenses that are that increase every year, that are based on either contractual agreements with, could be personnel unions. It could be out-of-district providers like special education programs or schools. It could be based on expenses that are required by special education laws, or leases or other arrangements, contracts, services that the school committee or school department has agreed to and are binding. You'll see in terms of our annual salary increases that we have budgeted for so far, our step and lane increases that are in our collective bargaining agreements, plus special education reserve positions that we always put in place as a protection against new special education responsibilities. That accounts for a $5 million increase before we do anything. Our out-of-district tuition, we expect to raise by $470,000 next year because of increases in those tuition costs. Transportation, our mandatory transportation for special education, homeless and foster families increases by $600,000 next year. And our regular education transportation will increase by $42,000. And then we have building services obligations at our 2 Clark Road facility and supplies to support that facility, and those total $112,000. There is one thing, this gray row here isn't mandatory. It's been something that the district has been committed to for the last 5 years, I believe, and that is increasing on an annual basis in our K-8s, nurse guidance, and English language education staff. This could be a potential cut here. I'm putting it here as a planned increase. It's not mandatory. That's an area that we could consider. These would be new positions that we could consider not including, and that would move us towards addressing the $6.3 million. But as you can see, before we would increase anything else, our mandatory and planned expenses already total $6.4 million in increases. That's before we look at anything else at all.
Then just before you move on from this slide, I did just want to clarify, you said a couple things using the word like binding and mandatory. And I just want to clarify that as we're talking about contractual increases, that some of those contractual increases have not been negotiated or agreed upon, and so those might be in that category that you. So I just want to just make the distinction that there might be planned or originally anticipated or budgeted increases, but that those are in no way mandatory. And so I just want to clarify, because I think this slide is a little confusing in that way.
Good. Thank you. That's an important distinction. In typical years, if there's been a contract with all our, like for example, with our AFSCME union, those contractual increases are built in because there is a contract that we're operating underneath a current one. And this happens to be this case at this moment. BEU and the school committee haven't agreed on a contract next year, but you're right, that would have to be negotiated or could be negotiated. You're correct. This is the typical way we build budgets each year, is by first adding in the mandatory expenses that are put here. But you're right, there could be some changes in some of these, including that first row. And exactly. So these aren't cut in stone, but they are ones that we are already obligated in some way, shape, or form to pay for. But there is some way to change some of them. That's true. Let me just continue on. Just to show the committee and the public the areas that we are looking at in terms of planning the budget. So we are identifying, I should say, plan reductions that the school department can make regardless of the model or approach we do for learning next year. Those are primarily district central office staff and district-wide costs. Number 2 is reductions that we would make because of lower projected revenue. I will say there are very few of these reductions that we would like to make across all of these categories or any of these categories. We'll be forced to make a number of them across every category. This will be administrators. It could be some program cuts. It could be services and supplies, that sort of thing. Number 3 is an area that really depends largely on the decisions we make about the learning approach next year. The complexity on this is, as I said before, we have to identify enough flexibility in staffing to make sure we can execute a wide range of possibilities next year. At the same time, we have to identify some reductions because of the deficit we're facing. But that number 3 there is, ideally, we would be actually making those. We would take some more time to make some of these decisions on the reductions in this area until we have a better idea, a more concrete idea about the learning approach next year. Because we are facing the need to produce a budget, understandably, for the town process, we'll have to make some assumptions here on the approach in order to build a budget. And I'll be sharing those details with folks on Monday. Revolving fund considerations, this really gets into issues and concerns around the BEEP revolving fund and what learning approach we could possibly provide with BEEP next year, whether we can, what tuition we would charge and whether we can charge tuition, and the scale and scope of BEEP. Also, it gets into food service revolving fund as well, and to some degree athletics as well. But all of those ones which are which generate revenue in order to pay for operations and staff, there's the risk on all of them that if we have if we're paying for costs, staff, supplies, services, and we don't have the revenue generating possibilities that there are revolving funds, BEEP, food services, to some degree athletics, can cause a significant added deficit well beyond the $6.3 million. That's something that the school committee and the administration will continue to work on, but it's an area of significant risk that we're all facing. Then the last area is on this is other cost saving options to consider that need to be negotiated. That could be everything from furloughs, pay freezes, long-term and short-term furloughs, reduction in days. There are a variety of options that all require working in partnership with our labor unions. But those are areas that the committee should consider, and we will give you some examples of ways you could pursue those. These are just ranges, just broad ranges of the different categories I just explained in terms of what we're sort of targeting in these different areas. So plan reductions, this is central office, district-wide staff and work, looking for to try to identify savings between $1 million and $2.5 million. These reductions that are necessary because of lower projected revenue, those are a combination of school-based and district-wide costs, looking to save $1 million to $1.5 million. And then reductions based on the learning approach, hoping to identify $2.5 to $3 million based on the staff we would need to successfully execute a school next year. And then, as I mentioned, revolving fund considerations are to be determined, and also any options that need to be negotiated are to be determined as well. So just the last step here, and again, this is the accelerated timeline that we are on. June 1st, present the budget to the school committee meeting, this Monday evening. June 4th, a budget hearing about that budget that's presented at the school committee meeting. And then we have to schedule presentations to the select board and advisory committee, all in preparation for town meeting at the end of June. So happy, I hope that wasn't too quick, but I did hear the pressure from Julie to make it short. So I talked quickly.
No,
happy to,
yep. Especially because we will have so much, this is, the amount of time is not meant to indicate the importance of this conversation and the importance of some of these impacts, but just to acknowledge that that this is a conversation that we will be continuing and having more in depth on Monday. And so, does anyone have any comments that they would like to make now that they're not able to wait for either finance on Friday or full school committee when we discuss the budget on Monday? Yes, Suzanne?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before, but just to say again publicly, I think in our priorities, we want to make sure that to the best of our ability, that the cuts are as far away from the students in the classroom as possible. And so I do think we need to ask that question as we go along. The other comment I want to make is that we just don't know whether we will be back in school in the fall or whether it will be remote learning, and our plans have to be flexible, and to make reductions based on something we don't know will happen would be quite dangerous. And so I think we need to be very cautious about that, how we think about those reductions.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely on both those accounts. We do have to be cautious, and we do have to have flexibility. And we're always trying to prioritize, cuts away from the classroom. So I hear you 100% on that. I just do want to be open with the committee and with the public that at a 5% cut, it's hard to, there will be impacts, and there'll be impacts across the district, and there's no way to prevent that. I don't say that, I say that very seriously. I say that with great concern. But I do just want to be clear that it'll be very, very difficult to hold, to not to have some real significant impacts. I think we all need to be very concerned about that. Thank you, Suzanne.
All right, so that brings us now to.
I think Sharon has her hand up. You may not be able to see her because the.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you. Appreciate that, Jennifer. Sharon?
Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm hearing from parents in the community that people are starting to talk about withdrawing their kids from TSP next year in a remote learning situation. They're going to be conducting homeschooling. I'm starting to hear from people about enrolling children in public schools in private schools or relocating out of the district. Are there conversations that are taking place in districts that are like Brookline, which are high cost sort of residence areas, where people come for the schools? Are we anticipating a possible decline in enrollment, I guess?
I think it's very hard to predict that. It's like it's very hard to predict most things. We don't have any sense of people moving out for some of the reasons you just mentioned. We are aware, although we haven't had much communication, incoming around families holding their students out. We know that we're aware that there's that concern and that likelihood. Okay, but I'm just saying we haven't got direct communication from folks saying they're planning on doing that. We do expect that there could be, we anticipate or think there might be decline in enrollment because of our international students. If folks remember, during the presentation about the enrollment forecast earlier this year, it was made pretty clear that some of the reason we're able to maintain our high enrollment has been because of the ongoing influx of international families. For many reasons, obviously, that may be curtailed. It may be curtailed significantly. If that was the case, we always lose international families, but those are replenished by other international families. And so we may not have that replenishment. And that, I think, is very likely to lower enrollment. And I think we can have a sense on that as we continue. Those other areas are likely, but it's as likely other folks will move here as that might just balance out on those other areas you mentioned, but we don't yet have solid information on that other than suggestions that might take place.
Julie, just a quick
Yes, thank you, Helen. Sorry, it's because the presentation is still up. I can't
Yeah,
see.
I know. That's why I said something. So
Thank you.
Ben, usually around this time, we get an update on kindergarten registrations. And, maybe for next time, or if you have it now, that's great. But, just to compare it this year to last year, that would be great.
Sure. I don't have it right now, but yes. And just so everyone knows, our registration office has been working, full bore during this whole process. They're doing it all remotely. They're holding off some screenings, that sort of stuff, but they sent out school placements. Might have been last week, might have been 2 weeks ago. I can't remember right now, but 2 weeks ago, yep. And yes, we'll get you an update on kindergarten enrollment. That's a good idea.
Thank you. Great. So we have a need for a vote to amend Article 11.11 of the contract between the Brookline School Committee and the Brookline Educators Union to extend the announcement of reduction in force RIFs for the 2019-2020 year only. I think though, is that actually correct? Is it that the year, or the announcement is for 2021?
No, just for this year. Oh, the deadline's for May 30, 2020. Am I understanding your question?
Oh, okay. We're amending this contract year. I'm just wanting to make sure we're amending the right contract year.
Yeah, we are. Yes, we are. Yeah, meaning that it's just a little confusing. It's for this current year, but the agreement is for this current year, 2019-20, but the deadline, May 30th, and that reduction in force notification is for the following year.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning this agreement you're going to vote on right now expires at the end of this school year. Because it's only relevant for May 30th of 3 days from now. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Just wanted to make sure we were voting the right thing, because it is an important one. As follows, then the language is, quote, when a RIF is to take place, the superintendent or his or her designee shall give written notice to the affected teachers with professional status by email no later than May 30th, 2020, and that's a change. What was May 15th, preceding the effective date of the reduction. If, however, the RIF of any individual teacher are rescinded before the effective date of the reduction and the teacher is to be reemployed, the Director of Human Resources shall so inform the affected teacher in writing. So that's the motion. Do we have a second? Thank you, David. All right, any discussion? And just to note, the information was forwarded to everyone by email. This is something that Ben had reached out to Dr. Winder Shubo from the president of the BEU to ask for this movement of date to allow more discussion about reductions in force that might be necessary because of the budget situation. And we appreciate that she did grant that extension. Because it is a modification of the contract language, the school committee has to authorize this. So that's why we're doing it as a formal vote. All right, so seeing no discussion, Ms. Charlepsky, Dr. Abramowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly?
Yes.
Ms. Federspiel?
Yes.
Ms. Scotto?
Yes.
Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes as well. All right, so that...
Julie, I just would like to add something. I mean, I think you covered most of this, but I do want to make sure the community is aware, you all, which I think you are, but also the community. I mentioned in this short budget overview about the difficulties we're all facing. And this isn't just Brookline, as everyone knows. This is across the Commonwealth, if not across the country. The budget we have to develop with a 5% cut, the time frame we have to do it on, and with the tremendous uncertainty about how actually we will, provide schooling in the fall, and that means how we will staff that schooling. Because of that, we will be noticing a significant number of staff on Friday. We have to build in some flexibility on not noticing. And as often happens when schools do this, and schools used to do this much more frequently than we have of late, we're likely to provide notice to many more people or more people, I should say, than actually will be, are in jeopardy. But we only will do that because of the vast uncertainty we face and the many, many variables. We understand that these notices, if folks are laid off, how difficult and just terrible any organization, any company, any organization, face when they face that, how incredibly difficult it is, and even just getting the notice of this. I mean, I remember when I was a teacher, my first couple of years, I got the notice, and it's very, very difficult. But I also, as want to assure, as the committee has talked about, that our intention is to preserve as many positions as we possibly can, especially as related to the classroom. But I do want to make sure that you and the community understand that these notices will happen because of the difficult circumstances we are in, and we don't take it lightly. We take it very seriously, and we will work, with our staff, with the school committee, to make sure that we can bring back just as many people as possible. That is the intention, to be fully staffed. That is the hope, and we'll continue to work with you towards that.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us to a discussion of the town meeting warrant articles. We had a hearing last night, just last night, or it feels like maybe 5 days ago, but I think it was last night. We had a hearing earlier this week with the select board on the Brookline High School project, which is Article 7. Do we have any, which was additional authorization for funding for the high school project? Are there any questions or discussions on that warrant article? Susan, did you have a motion that you'd like to make with respect to that article?
We recommend favorable action.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, so all of those, I'm going to go through roll call vote. Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
Ms. Charlevsky?
Yes.
Dr. Abramowitz? I think that she's stepped away. We'll come back. Ms. Monopoly?
Yes.
Ms. Scotto?
Yes.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff?
Yes.
Ms. Federspiel?
Yes.
The chair votes yes as well. Sharon, are you with us? So on a vote of 7-0, that passes. Now, unless anyone else thinks otherwise, I don't think we need to have further writing or explanation from the school committee on this. Everyone agrees? Okay, great. So that brings us to the Articles 9 through 15 on Newberry College land use and land acquisition. We had a hearing on this several weeks ago, again, a joint hearing with the select board. Does anyone have any discussion or items that they'd like to raise with respect to the Newberry warrant articles? Helen, was this discussed further at the capital subcommittee? Is there any recommendation that came out of capital?
Actually, help me, capital subcommittee. I think we discussed it a while ago. I think in terms of the added revenue to the town from the project, I think we felt that, and the fact that it would add affordable housing, that this was something that we would want to support, both of those aspects. Also, I mean, I think it's in terms of the, Barbara, did you want to say something?
Well, I wanted to say something about the affordable housing one.
Okay.
There is one of the lots would be used for excuse me, affordable housing, and there is great controversy over that because there is some affordable housing owned by the housing, what do you call it? I wasn't even thinking about this before, but that is on that's already in North Brookline that is in terrible disarray. I have my notes upstairs for it. And if the question is, if the money goes to Newberry for the affordable housing, and this is a separate vote, then it will not be available to go to this other housing project, which already exists in town. It is in Coolidge Corner. It is, I think, 90 apartments versus maybe 35.
I'm pretty sure it's 60 new units.
Right. But I think that there are voices in town that support either one or the other.
I'm not sure that that's something there's a housing authority, and it seems to me, and affordable housing groups. And I'm not sure this is something the school committee should necessarily weigh in on in terms of where the housing should be.
But it is a separate vote in town meeting as one of the Newberry votes. Maybe we shouldn't vote on it.
I think on that one, we could take no action.
I would take no action on that one.
Or, I mean, no, is that the right way to do it, or just no opinion? Or
I think we would not take any action. So we wouldn't.
Because it doesn't affect schools in any way, and it's a very controversial item in town.
Right. And I think the other piece is the purchase of the property across the way. And that, I think, is, we've always said, as David has said in the past, we need more space for many things in town. And, having some options to purchase the land may be a good idea. It will eventually go to the voters, so it's not, town meeting can either appropriate it now or appropriate it, I suppose, after it goes to the voters. Because I think the selectmen can still put it on a ballot. Isn't that correct? Those of you who are town meeting members?
I think that they would have to be, the appropriation has to be approved by town meeting. So it's essentially giving pre-authorization. If it's then approved by the voters, town meeting has authorized it to happen. So it is out of traditional order, but it's a necessary step regardless. So the question though is, and we have this esoteric debate often, the question is, to what extent and on which of the warrant articles school committee should opine at this time, and which ones relate to the school, to the schools, to school children, to and whether there is anything at this point we would want to say. Perhaps to the extent that we were to make a statement that we need more space in town for many things, including school use. And if this site were acquired, that the schools would like to be part of the conversation about being able to utilize the land for school purposes, including but not limited to classrooms and office space and fields, etc., for many uses. I don't know if that's an approach that we would want to take.
One of the uses that's being discussed for the short term, I think there will be a community process of how the land will be used. And my sense is that, in the short run, we are talking about it for meeting spaces, which hopefully we will be able to do in person sometime soon. And, that it'll be a good space to have, for us to have. We do rent spaces occasionally for big meetings, and this would be a perfect site. There's parking and there's the easy ability to get there. I guess, and I'm just not sure where we as a school committee should come down on it. And I guess that's where I'm sort of trying to grapple with it.
Ellen, of the 3 articles, it is only the one across the road that the school would be involved in. The other one has to do with elderly housing that is being built there, expensive elderly housing.
Except that that's also revenue producing. They're estimating, I think, something like $39 million a year, which could go a long way towards helping our budget.
Right.
Although I don't think we did not opine on the marijuana, to the extent that that generates revenue and we need revenue. I mean, I think that is a slippery slope of us getting down, like we vote for that because it brings money to the town and we vote against that because it costs the town money. I think that might not be the best lens to look at these articles through. But we do need revenue, but
Yeah, because then that would imply that anytime there was land for sale in the town like this, we perhaps should opine on it. I think a stricter vote would be simply to vote on land that may be of use to us.
The west side?
Yeah, the west side.
And also I think the articles, there are actually 6 in total, and there are also a number of articles that relate to zoning for the use of the property that would be used by Welltower. And so I don't think we would need to. Do we have agreement that we do not need to opine on any of those? And then how about how about on the ones related to affordable housing? Does anyone else think, we've heard from Barbara and Helen, anyone else have opinions about whether we should opine on those? Suzanne, did you have something to say? Okay, so no, we're not going to opine on the ones about affordable housing then.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. It's important to the town. I don't know if it's a school committee, jurisdiction, but.
Well, the difference, what people would say to you as a pushback is you will get far more affordable housing if we use that money from the town budget to give to the reconstruction of the one that is in Coolidge Corner.
Yeah, I'm not weighing in one way or the other, Barbara. I'm just saying that I don't know that that's what the school committee needs to weigh in on. We certainly have our personal opinions and.
Right. I don't think the school committee should be voting on that one.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's what we were trying to decide.
Saying that it was affordable housing and we need it, and therefore we should.
Yeah. Okay.
So Barbara, I would agree with your earliest points during this segment, which is that we should really only be opining on the potential acquisition of the parcel where we would potentially envision school use.
Okay. And then, all right, so it seems we have agreement then that are only interested in, if we're opining on anything, it's only in the interest on the purchase of the west side. David, do you have any thoughts on what that language that we might support or be interested in discussing look like?
There's so much in flux right now. I think we would just want to make some kind of statement that we keep our options open, that we would be interested. But I don't think we're in a position right now to say precisely what we would use it for. We did take past votes about how we foresaw Newbury, but I think a lot has changed since then. We would need to revisit a lot of that planning, especially now with the current economic situation, and of course some of our other priorities where we're going to need to figure out how to reconfigure these spaces for social distancing. But I think just to express the sentiment that we would potentially be interested in utilizing the site for school use, I think we can leave it at that, because as Helen mentioned, there's going to be a whole town-wide community process about what would be the best purpose for the west parcel as a whole. And there are a lot of different interests that are both competing and some are complementary, and we would need to sift through that first.
So David, would you be willing to make a motion with respect to the article related to the west side, which we can find out which one it is, not at this juncture, but some very soon juncture?
Sure, I would move that we support the acquisition of Newbury for a variety of potential municipal uses, including potential school use.
Perfect.
All right, is that a second, Helen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any further discussion? 4, 5. Do we even have quorum of people who are still present?
2, 4, 5. Yes, 5.
We do have 5. All right. So Ms. Charlepsky,
Yes.
Mr. Perlman,
Yes.
Ms. Scotto,
Yes.
Ms. Fetterspiel,
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly,
Yes.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff, are you with us? She has stepped away, and then Dr. Bromwitz had to leave the meeting to step away from the meeting as well, and I vote yes as well. We have 1, 2. So by a vote of 6 to 0 to 0, that motion passes. David, would you be willing to write up that one sentence statement that you made at the end? And then if that's all right with everyone, we will submit that as our support for this warrant article.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that, David. I appreciate it. Helen?
We should probably have a one sentence for the high school too.
You think we should?
Just something to say.
Is it our article though? Is it our article so that all of the language about it we are in support of, or is it being submitted by someone else?
Susan would know that. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm just not remembering what the specific language is.
Either. All right, we can just vote yes. All right.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem, even if it's not our article, I think that it costing $33 million more will be attributed towards us. So
it's self-evident it's our article. Yes.
I think so. So I do think, unless you're wanting to volunteer to write that language, you probably have enough. All right, so that brings us to new business. Did we have, yes, Suzanne, I know.
Yeah, I was thinking Sharon was going to do this because she is on the liaison on the CDIRC commission, but she had to step away. So the chair, Joan Langcourt, asked that we just announce that there is a conversation, a forum on housing affordability. And it's going to be Sunday afternoon, June 14th from 1 to 3. And there'll be 2 follow-up forums after that. So I think we sent the flyer to all the school committee members, but I also asked the community to consider attending this very important forum. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Suzanne. Does anyone else have other new business? Yes, Helen?
Well, it's old business. Does that fall under this too, or just new business?
Just new business.
Okay, never mind.
Okay. All right. So on that note, we suspended our executive session earlier so that we could timely move into open session, just so that we wouldn't keep anyone waiting. So we will be moving back into executive session. I now forget what we have to take another motion to return to. Yes, we have to take another vote to return into executive session. I'm going to make a motion to return to executive session. Do we have a second for that? Thank you, Helen. Okay, Ms. Charlepsky?
Yes.
Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
Ms. Scotto?
Yes.
Ms. Fetterspiel?
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly?
Yes.
Ms. Wolf-Dickoff, are you with us? And the chair votes yes as well. So we will be returning into executive session, and we will not be returning into open session at the end of executive session. And so for school committee members, we're going to stay on this call number. We're going to wait for BIG to